made limitless. That's life unlimited.
Even the mighty might not see it coming. It's prediabetes, and it captures 1 in 3 adults. But you can escape. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test to know where you stand and prevent or delay type 2 diabetes. Be your own hero on smartphones everywhere at doihaveprediabetes.org.
Spectrum News Plus. Local stories, connecting communities. Streaming now on the Spectrum News app and free with your Spectrum subscription.
Welcome to The Big Deal. I'm Errol Lewis, national political anchor at Spectrum News. Every week since we launched this show, we've been looking at some of the biggest issues shaping our nation and the final stretch of the road to the White House. More than 63 million Americans have already cast their ballots, and in just a few days, voters will have their final say in this historic presidential election. This week, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris delivered their closing arguments, showing a stark contrast between their candidacies. And in the final full week of the 2024 campaign, both candidates visited all 7 battleground states, from Pennsylvania all the way to Nevada, shoring up last-minute support from key voting blocs, while Trump also made stops in a few other states, including New York and New Mexico. In this final episode before election night, the big deal is how close the race has become, with Trump and Harris still neck and neck, both nationally and in the swing states. I'll break it all down with the help of my Spectrum News colleagues across the country. But first, here's a look at some of the key moments from the campaign trail.
Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Hispanics love Trump. No president's done more for Puerto Rico than I have.
Donald Trump has spent a decade trying to keep the American people divided and afraid of each other.
I'm president. I want to protect the women of our country. Well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
It actually is, I think, very offensive, and this is just the latest on a series of reveals by the former president of how he thinks about women and their agency.
She's worse than crooked Hillary, actually. You know, Hillary was a lot smarter.
He is not someone who is thinking about how to make your life better.
And I will bring back the American dream.
He has increased his violent rhetoric, Donald Trump has.
I'm asking you to be excited about the future again. You have to be excited.
Put the Constitution of the United States before party.
Joining me now with some political analysis are 2 top commentators. Ibeth Bruce-Wall is an anchor for Spectrum News 13 in Orlando, Florida. Alex Cohen is political anchor at Spectrum News 1 in Southern California. And Ibeth, there was a firestorm of reaction to those hateful and obscene insults that were directed at Latinos during Donald Trump's final rally at Madison Square Garden. Of course, it included or was followed by a wave of celebrity endorsements of Kamala Harris. So, are Democrats successfully turning that painful moment into political gain?
Really, it depends on who you ask, Errol. And if you ask Democrats, they're going to say yes, and here's why. It has been an avalanche of messages to turn the situation around, not just on the mainstream media, as some parties call it, but also every single level, every platform of social media, TikTok, Instagram, X, Facebook, Threads. The campaign using powerful imagery of Puerto Rico and faces that are recognized within the Hispanic community and the Puerto Rican community to get that message across that nobody calls us trash. But I also have to add this. Watching Spanish language media in Puerto Rico all this week, they dedicated a lot of time, but then they scaled back. And there was also, and I didn't see this on any of the media, a caravan, a pro-Trump caravan in the streets of Puerto Rico with flags and signs saying no matter what, they support Trump. Some anyway.
Very interesting. And now, Alex, this week, Donald Trump also used violent rhetoric to attack a former Congresswoman, Liz Cheney. Here's a little bit of what that sounded like.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face.
With threats at Donald Trump rallies going from lock her up to, basically shoot her in the face. We know from pollsters and strategists that women voters in particular don't really respond well to that kind of talk. It reminds me that we are seeing what is an enormous gender gap, with men flocking to Trump and women basically going to Kamala Harris.
And of course, that's not necessarily an absolute truth across the board. But, hearkening back to what Ebeth just said a couple moments ago, the Trump campaign said those remarks about Liz Cheney have been taken out of context. It had more to do with her record on the war than an actual threat of violence. But we live in this world of snippets and tiny little chunks of information. And I have a good feeling that a lot of the folks might just hear a small portion of that, which definitely I think will sound to a lot of folks and a lot of women like a threat of violence. When I think of the gender gap in this election, the first thing that comes to mind is an ad that's been running. Julia Roberts does the narration, and it pictures a couple going in, and the man votes and the woman votes, husband and wife, and the woman kind of looks across to another woman, and the whole voiceover is, when you vote, it is your secret ballot. Nobody, not even your husband, needs to know who you're voting for. And I think it'll be really interesting to see, is there a strong turnout of women who've just said enough with the former president and his rhetoric when it comes to women?
Ebeth, one of the biggest policy differences in this race is that Donald Trump wants to continue allowing individual states to place tough, near absolute restrictions on abortion, while Kamala Harris has promised to reinstate the protections of Roe versus Wade. When you look at the early voting data, how is this issue playing out, as best you can tell?
I want to talk about something that we saw on Newsweek, right? And depends on the day of the week or the way the wind is blowing. Poll after poll seem to vary. But this one in particular from Newsweek, as I looked down on my notes, there's at least 10-point gap in favor of women in the early vote, Pennsylvania, which is key to talk about. That's according to Politico, and they're looking at analysis from the University of Florida's United States Election Project. So women registered, right, in Pennsylvania, Democrats, also making nearly third in early votes of people who did not vote in the 2020 election. And I want to point out to something that our colleague Alex just mentioned, missed opportunity, because when you look at that ad, and we've seen that ad here in Florida as well, they're saying when a wife, she's looking over her shoulder at her husband, well, what if a wife has a wife, not a husband? So I think the messaging there could have been improved depending on who you ask. It is 2024, so that really jumped out at me.
Very interesting. And now, Alex, let's talk about a state next to yours. In Nevada, both candidates are fighting hard to win. What is the state of play in that particular swing state?
Man, the Silver State is a very, very close race indeed. And it's just a place that has changed so much in recent years. We've seen a lot of folks moving into the area, and a place that was once considered a Democratic stronghold may be shifting. A lot of folks are paying a whole lot of attention to early vote. But the thing is, where Republican voters have definitely been outpacing Democrats, that said, we'll go back to your ballot is your secret ballot. Just because there is an R next to your name does not mean you voted for Donald Trump. Just because there is a D next to your name doesn't mean you voted for Kamala Harris. And a shout out to John Ralston, who is really the man to follow if you want to know what's going on in Nevada. He points out the fact that right now you've got about a quarter of the voters independent. So you can't make any assumptions whatsoever about how they're voting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, truly a 50-50 race. In our last minute, Ebeth, I see that Hillary Clinton is campaigning in Tampa this weekend. This is a place notably that Kamala Harris has not visited. Do Democrats actually think there's a long shot chance at winning Florida?
There's a chance with everything in this election cycle, but I think right now, Florida is red, all right? But there are pockets that have turned purple, and some districts in the last few cycles have flipped. So there is hope. And it's not just Secretary Clinton who's coming. Her husband, Bill Clinton, also in the state of Florida this weekend. And it's not just the top of the ticket. They're looking down the ballot. Senate race in Florida, really intense right now. The incumbent Senator Rick Scott, Republican, being challenged by by Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, a Democrat, who some of the polls have them neck and neck.
Okay, tough to predict, but we'll be watching all of it. Thank you both so much for that analysis. We're going to take a break now. Coming up, we've got more analysis on the race for president. Stay with us. The 2024 election will decide who leads our nation and the balance of power in Congress, impacting all of us. From Capitol Hill to the Oval Office, let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth coverage with our dedicated experts in local politics. Strengthening democracy by informing your community. That's our mission. Available on all of your favorite devices, exclusively on Spectrum.
What if you never had to worry about what you could do? Because you could do anything. Anywhere could be the center of everywhere. And boundaries only existed to be pushed. So the only limit you faced was how big you could dream. What would you do then? Some pretty cool stuff, I bet. Yeah, that'd be some life. That'd be life unlimited.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. Two milligrams of fentanyl can be lethal. A lethal dose is in here. Who gets it, I won't know.
It's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable.
The sad reality is fentanyl is being mixed into everything now.
More kids should know.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
We're back with the big deal, keeping our focus on the high-stakes race for president. Alex Cohen is still with us, joining us from Southern California, and Tim Boyum is now with us. He's a political anchor for Spectrum News 1 in Raleigh, North Carolina, one of the 7 battleground states that everyone is watching especially closely. And Tim, early voting in North Carolina has broken records. Why is that happening? And as far as you can tell, does it favor either party?
Yeah, so by the end of today, half of all registered voters in North Carolina will have already voted. Just astounding numbers. We've been breaking records. Part of it is because we are simply a fast-growing state, and so there's more and more voters that are coming out. But also, Republicans have been given sort of permission to do early voting. In the past, Donald Trump has told them to vote on Election Day. Well, now we're seeing more encouragement, not only from Donald Trump, but the Republican Party and the RNC to vote early. Because of that, Republicans are right there neck and neck with Democrats. But the one thing, the caveat about that is we don't know whether they're just displacing the Election Day vote or whether or not that means that they are beating out Democrats. And so it's actually creating a lot of confusion to try to read the tea leaves of what's going to happen. But it's gangbusters. We're going to break records easily.
Okay, that in itself is good news. Now, when it comes to the mechanics of vote counting, every state does it differently. As far as I can remember, doesn't North Carolina tend to spit out numbers relatively early in the evening on Election Day?
Relatively, yes. It used to be more. There's a law change that happened. So we used to be one of the states where they would be able to tabulate early voting before 7:30, where the polls close in North Carolina. They could release them right at 7:30. That law has now changed, and so they cannot start tabulating until after 7:30 on Tuesday night. We will get absentee mail-in ballot results starting around 7:30, and then sometime between 8 and 9:30 is when we're going to get those early voting results, and then the county ones will start coming after that, just as a sort of final final stat on that. About 12:44 a.m. is when the final votes were uploaded in 2020. We'll see if they can get that done earlier this time. I don't know if that'll happen or not.
It's going to be a late night for all of us, no matter what. Finally, Tim, you have reported on the extraordinary efforts to set up early vote facilities in the western part of the state, where recent storms devastated Asheville and about 10 different counties out there. How is that working out?
Yeah, just real quick, it's inspirational in a lot of ways. I met a woman at an early voting site. She lost everything and was still determined to go out and vote, so that was really inspirational. What we've been told is that early voting numbers are somewhat similar to 2020, which is good news in some ways because they're still coming out in big numbers, but everywhere else it's growing from 2020. So that seems to tell us that it's going to be a little bit lower. That's good news and bad news for both Republicans and Democrats, because Asheville is a huge Democratic area, but all the rural areas around it are Republican, so it's going to be something to watch on election night.
Okay, so now, Alex, on the other hand, California always seems to take days or even weeks before we get the final count. What is that all about? Are we going to be up all night waiting for those numbers?
Oh, I would say go to bed early because it's going to take days, Errol, for some of these races, especially these close congressional races. Look, here's the thing. It is very important to the good folks of California who run the elections process to make sure that as many people who are eligible to can vote. So that means, for example, let's say you decide to mail your ballot on Election Day. They want to make sure that it gets received. So we have these rather large windows, and so sometimes you're waiting and waiting and waiting because sometimes you just got to make sure, are there any last-minute ballots coming in? If they make it by that deadline, then those too get counted. Double-checking that signatures are okay. I've talked to registrars here in California who feel the pain because they know everyone is wanting to know results right away in our fast-paced information world, but they said, you can get it done quickly or you can get it done accurately. And in the end, that accuracy, I think, is what should be, and certainly is to these folks who work in elections, the most important priority.
Okay. Well, when I want to know the totals, I will be checking you out on Spectrum News 1. So now, Tim, walk us through what you think is the simplest or most likely path to victory for both candidates.
Yeah, so there's a lot of puzzle pieces that can move around, but we know basically the states that they're going to win and the states that they need to win. And we can show you here for Kamala Harris. This is what I think is, coming up to sort of a northern strategy versus southern strategy. And for Kamala Harris, I think you look at that blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and then that electoral college vote in Nebraska. That's most likely, I think, possibly the easiest policy for her to get all those votes up there. For Donald Trump, it's sort of that southern strategy. It's winning Georgia, North Carolina, and then also adding in, obviously, the all-important state of Pennsylvania. Some people have North Carolina in there for Harris, too, as a possible path, but Democrats have only won in 2008 and 1976 in the modern era before that. So I think she needs to focus more up north. But it sure seems at this point that Pennsylvania, if there's a ground zero in this election, it is that state.
Absolutely. Alex, your turn. What do you think Harris and Trump need to do in these final days?
They need to get people out and voting. Look, I think there's very few people left in this country. There's no one who feels meh about it. There's no one who doesn't have strong opinions. But are those opinions strong enough to get out and actually vote? I think there might be a lot of people who just feel so turned off by both candidates or feel very strongly about one of them, but maybe not strong enough to turn out for the other one. I think that's going to be the real clincher in the end, is what actually happens on that day. A lot of people will wake up with that individual choice of whether or not they're going to take the effort to go out and vote. And I think there could be some surprises that none of us could possibly pretend at this moment. It may take some time to see what those surprises have been.
And real quick, Alex, we spoke last week about all of the competitive swing congressional districts in and around Los Angeles in particular. Do the Democrats get a boost because they've got a favorite daughter, Kamala Harris, at the top of the ticket?
I think a lot of folks here in California can put a distance between who they vote at the top of the ticket. Local isn't necessarily always everything that there is about politics. And I think we could see some interesting split tickets here in the Golden State.
All right. Thanks very much, Alex. And thank you, Tim. We are not done with the big deal just yet. Coming up next, we'll examine how democracy has shaped the race for the White House. Stay with Spectrum.
Thousands of school-aged children across the country, the state of their schools can have a lasting impact on their health and well-being.
The majority of school districts aren't doing comprehensive regular water quality testing.
As CO2 levels rise in a space, cognitive function takes a direct decline.
We visit 2 school districts working to create safe and healthy environments for their students.
Watch Exploring Your Health, Curing Our Classrooms. Available on the Spectrum News app.
When you never have to worry about thinking too big? Because you have a connection that's ready for anything. That's Life Unlimited. That's Spectrum.
I tell my son, I love you every single day. Now, my dad has never said that to me. Not because he doesn't love me, but because culturally it wasn't comfortable for him. Now that he's a grandfather, he says, I love you to my son every time he sees him. My advice to all the fathers out there, forget the cultural restrictions. They grow up way too fast for you to waste even a single precious moment.
Food isn't just fuel to live, it's fuel to grow. My family relied on public assistance to help provide meals for us. These meals fueled my involvement in theater and the arts as a child, which fostered my love for acting. The Feeding America network of food banks helps millions of people put food on the table. When people are fed, futures are nourished. Join the movement to end hunger, and together we can open endless possibilities for people to thrive. Visit feedingamerica.org/actnow.
Watching The Big Deal. I'm Errol Lewis. Even as he faces prosecution for attempting to subvert the 2020 election, former President Donald Trump will not fully commit to accepting the results of this election. That and his promise to prosecute his political enemies are among the many reasons that Kamala Harris has called Trump a threat to democracy. In this report, Spectrum News political reporter Bobby Kuza examines accusations that Donald Trump could upend democratic norms.
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But 4 years later, former President Donald Trump is still peddling lies about the 2020 election, even after his effort to overturn the results led to a violent assault on the Capitol and criminal indictments of Trump and numerous associates. Now he seems to be setting the stage for a repeat.
The radical left Democrats rigged the presidential election in 2020, and we're not going to allow them to rig the presidential election in 2024.
Trump's grievances about 2020 have led him to call for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. And he has repeatedly promised retribution, writing on social media, those people that cheated will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences, warning this legal exposure extends to lawyers, political operatives, donors, illegal voters, and corrupt election officials. Trump's promise to weaponize the Justice Department against his enemies is the very thing he's baselessly accused President Joe Biden of doing. It would represent a break with long-standing policy shielding the Justice Department from political interference. Trump says he'll appoint a special prosecutor to go after Biden and his family, among others, accusing his opponents of crimes, including Vice President Kamala Harris.
She's a criminal. She's a criminal. She really is.
More recently, Trump has begun using a new phrase.
It's the enemy from within, all the scum that we have to deal with. They are indeed the enemy from within. It is the enemy from within, and they're very dangerous. They're Marxists and communists and fascists.
Trump's rhetoric is often clearly at odds with the First Amendment. He's said critics of the Supreme Court should be jailed and recently threatened CBS after claiming a 60 Minutes interview with Harris was deceptively edited.
CBS gets a license, and the license is based on honesty. I think they have to take take their license away.
There are also concerns about state violence. Trump has suggested sending the military into big cities to fight crime, despite constraints on using military troops for domestic law enforcement. According to former Defense Secretary Mark Esper, Trump once raised the possibility of the military shooting violent protesters in the legs. As for January 6th, Trump downplays the day's events.
It was love and peace.
And has suggested he would pardon rioters, even those convicted of assaulting police. All of it has led Kamala Harris to raise alarms.
I believe Donald Trump is a danger to the well-being and security of America.
Trump, of course, rejects the notion he poses a threat to democracy. He seeks to deflect attention to the way Biden was removed from the Democratic ticket.
You talk about a threat to democracy. He got 14 million votes and they threw him out of office.
Biden, of course, willingly called off his re-election campaign, and the Democratic Party followed all rules and procedures in installing Harris as the nominee. Bobby Kuza, Spectrum News.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Big Deal. And be sure to join us on Tuesday, November 5th for election night results and analysis. If you're not a Spectrum News customer, we're making our coverage available live to anyone interested in watching through the Spectrum News app. Also available on all your favorite devices. We'll see you next week. Stay tuned to your local station.
I'm Sharon Towswell. Thanks for joining us. Your Spectrum News in 90 is coming up right after this short break. Stay with us. I'm Sharon Towswell. Thanks for joining us. Your Spectrum News in 90 is coming up right after this short break. Stay with us. I'm Sharon Towswell. Thanks for joining us. Your Spectrum News in 90 is coming up right after this short break. Stay with us.
Friday nights, The Big Deal with Errol Lewis, where Spectrum News' local political journalists break down the most important issues shaping our nation.
Here's the deal. People need a place to explore national issues that have an impact on their community. To understand those issues better, we're bringing together our team of local political journalists from across the country to break down what's happening. So join us every week to catch up on the key stories making a big difference across the nation and in your local community.
Watch The Big Deal with Errol Lewis Friday nights at 9 Eastern, 8 Central on Spectrum News Plus. Available on all of your favorite devices, exclusively on Spectrum.
At Spectrum Enterprise, we give over 80% of the Fortune 500 the technology solutions they need to meet their growing business demands. Whether it's ultra-fast connectivity, seamless transactions, safe and secure data, or reliable always-on technology, these businesses demand better, and we're here to deliver it. Get a network you can rely on with our 100% uptime SLA guarantee.
Whether it's our stories, the warmth of our laugh, or our family's secret sauce, we all bring something different to the table. So make some space. The power of connection is waiting right outside your comfort zone. Learn how you can help strengthen your community at belongingbeginswithus.org/team up.
Our journey towards improving mental health doesn't always present a clear path. Every Thursday on Your Mental Health, we listen to voices across our communities, discussing the challenges of everyday life and presenting accessible resources to guide us along the path to our well-being, providing hope and empowering choices that light the way to a healthier you.
Your Mental Health with Dr. Nicole Clark, Thursdays on Spectrum News Plus, available on all your favorite devices. Spectrum News Plus, local stories, connecting communities. Streaming now on the Spectrum News app and free with your Spectrum subscription.